When someone never texts you first, it can quietly mess with your confidence. You start checking your phone more often, rereading old messages, and wondering what you did wrong. The silence feels personal even when no words are spoken. But here's the truth: most people never hear. Attraction doesn't disappear because of silence. It disappears because of how we react to that silence. What you say next, and even more importantly, how you say it, can either push someone further away or make them suddenly realize what they're about to lose. This isn't about manipulation or chasing. It's about calm confidence, emotional strength, and knowing how to communicate in a way that creates space for someone to miss you naturally. When someone never texts you first, the mind immediately jumps to the most painful conclusion, which is that they don't care enough. But that assumption skips over something important about human behavior and modern communication. People text differently for many reasons that have nothing to do with desire or interest. Some people are reactive communicators, meaning they respond warmly and consistently but rarely initiate because it simply doesn't occur to them, or because they've learned to wait rather than lead. Others are cautious, especially if they sense that you're always available, because they don't feel the urgency to reach out. And some people, particularly those who are confident or busy, don't use texting as a measure of emotional closeness at all. They see it as a logistical tool, not an emotional one. The real danger is not that he never texts first, but the story you start telling yourself because of it. The moment you internalize silence as rejection, your energy changes. You begin to text differently. Your messages carry more weight, more expectation, more unspoken need. You may not say anything dramatic, but the emotional tone shifts from light and grounded to subtly anxious. And people are incredibly sensitive to that shift, even if they can't explain it logically. What they feel is pressure, not connection. It's also important to understand that texting first has become an artificial scoreboard in dating. People treat it like proof of interest when in reality it's just one small behavior inside a much bigger picture. Someone can care deeply and still be inconsistent with initiation. Someone else can text first every day and still feel emotionally unavailable. When you focus too much on who initiates, you stop paying attention to how someone shows up when they are present. Do they engage when you talk? Do they ask questions? Do they follow through? Do they make time? Those things tell a far more accurate story than a notification ever could. There's also a subtle power imbalance that forms when one person believes they are waiting to be chosen. The moment you start thinking, if I don't text, nothing will happen, you place all the power in their hands. You become reactive instead of centered. And attraction rarely grows when one person feels they are auditioning for attention. What actually creates interest is when someone senses that you are full, grounded, and living a life that doesn't pause just because a phone is quiet. Understanding that him not texting first does not automatically equal lack of interest is the emotional reset you need before you say or do anything else. Because once you stop personalizing the silence, you stop chasing reassurance. And when you stop chasing reassurance, your words become calmer, your presence becomes lighter, and your energy shifts from waiting to choosing, from hoping to knowing, from trying to be missed to simply being someone whose absence is naturally felt when you are no longer filling every gap, every pause, every moment of quiet with effort that goes unnoticed, unreciprocated, and unchallenged, leaving room for curiosity to grow where certainty once lived, and space to exist where noise once dominated, allowing him to feel the difference without you having to explain it, justify it, or force it into existence through constant initiation and emotional overextension that slowly teaches someone they don't need to reach for you because you are always already there waiting. One of the most common mistakes people make when they feel ignored is believing that doing more will fix the distance. When a message isn't answered quickly or initiative doesn't come from the other side, the instinct is to compensate by being more available, more engaging, more accommodating. You might send longer texts, ask more questions, share more about your day, or try to keep the conversation alive single-handedly. On the surface, this feels loving and patient, but underneath it's driven by fear of losing connection. And fear has a way of leaking into behavior even when you're trying to be calm and supportive. What happens next is subtle but powerful. By over-giving your attention, you remove any sense of challenge or mystery. The other person doesn't have to lean in because everything is already being handed to them. There's no emotional gap for curiosity to fill. When connection is always available on demand, it stops feeling special and starts feeling expected. This doesn't mean you should withdraw dramatically or play games, but it does mean that constantly filling silence teaches someone that your presence requires no effort on their part. Another hidden mistake is turning communication into a test. You start watching timestamps, counting response times, and measuring effort in small behaviors. This creates a silent scoreboard in your mind where every delayed reply feels like a loss. The problem with this mindset is that it keeps you emotionally hooked to outcomes you can't control. Instead of being present in your life, your emotional state rises and falls based on someone else's texting habits. That kind of attachment creates anxiety, and anxiety often comes across as tension, even through words on a screen. There's also the mistake of trying to indirectly ask for reassurance without actually saying it. People often do this by sending messages that are designed to prompt a response, like casual check-ins that aren't really casual, or statements that subtly invite validation. The intention is to feel wanted, but the effect can be the opposite. It places emotional responsibility on the other person without giving them a clear choice. Instead of feeling drawn in, they can feel weighed down even if they care about you. Over time, these patterns can create a dynamic where one person feels they are doing all the emotional work. And once that belief sets in, every interaction starts to feel heavier. You're no longer communicating from a place of confidence, but from a place of hoping to be reassured. The irony is that the more you seek reassurance through effort, the less attractive that effort becomes. Attraction responds to self-trust, not self-sacrifice, and when you abandon your own rhythm to keep someone else close, you slowly lose the grounded energy that made the connection feel easy in the first place, replacing it with urgency over analysis and a quiet desperation to be chosen that shows up not in what you say directly, but in how often you feel compelled to say something at all when emotional pressure enters a connection. It rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't show up as a demand or an argument at first. It shows up as a feeling, a subtle weight that the other person begins to associate with interacting with you. This pressure often comes from expectations that are never spoken but are deeply felt. When you start hoping that every message will lead somewhere, that every interaction will move things forward, your communication carries an invisible agenda. And even if your words are polite, supportive, or affectionate, the emotional undercurrent can feel heavy. Emotional pressure often builds when you start using someone's responses as a measure of your own worth. A fast reply feels like relief. A slow reply feels like rejection. Over time, this turns communication into an emotional roller coaster where your mood depends on their behavior. The other person may not know exactly what's happening, but they can sense that interacting with you now carries emotional consequences. They feel that if they don't respond a certain way, they might disappoint you, upset you, or create tension. And when people sense that kind of responsibility, they often pull back, not because they don't care, but because the interaction no longer feels free. There's also pressure in predictability. When someone knows that you will always be available, always respond quickly, and always be emotionally open, there's no room for anticipation. Attraction thrives on contrast, on the feeling that someone has a full life and chooses to connect rather than needs to. Emotional pressure removes that contrast. It replaces choice with obligation. Instead of feeling drawn toward you, the other person can start feeling like they are expected to show up in a specific way to keep things balanced. Another form of pressure comes from trying to secure the connection too early. This might look like subtly steering conversations toward reassurance, future plans, or clarity before the emotional foundation is naturally there. While the desire for certainty is understandable, pushing for it prematurely can create resistance. People want to arrive at desire on their own terms. When they feel guided, nudged, or emotionally cornered, their instinct is often to create distance so they can breathe and regain autonomy. The paradox is that the more you try to hold on emotionally, the less space you leave for attraction to grow. When you remove pressure, you also remove fear. And when fear disappears, curiosity has room to return. Lightness comes back into the interaction. Conversations feel optional rather than necessary. This shift doesn't require silence or coldness. It requires a change in energy where you stop asking the connection to validate you and start allowing it to unfold without force. The absence of pressure is felt immediately, even if nothing is said about it, because the tone of your messages changes from seeking something to simply sharing, from waiting for a response to being content in your own world, from needing an outcome to allowing the other person to step forward willingly when they feel the space to do so, without being pushed, tested, or emotionally managed into missing you. Pulling back is often misunderstood as a tactic, something cold or calculated that you do to provoke a reaction. But when it's done in a healthy way, it's not about manipulation at all. It's about returning to your own center. When you stop over-initiating, stop filling every silence, and stop making yourself constantly available, you're not playing a game, you're simply allowing the connection to breathe. And breathing room is essential for desire to exist. Without it, everything becomes compressed, predictable, and emotionally flat. The key difference between pulling back and playing games is intention. Playing games comes from insecurity and the need to control an outcome. Pulling back comes from self-respect and trust in your own value. You're not disappearing to punish someone, you're stepping back because you recognize that mutual effort matters. When you always reach first, always check in, and always keep things moving, you unintentionally communicate that the connection survives solely on your energy. Stepping back gives the other person the opportunity to feel the absence of that energy and decide whether they want to contribute their own. There's also something powerful about allowing someone to wonder. When you're constantly present, there's nothing to wonder about. Your thoughts, availability, and interest are always on display. Pulling back reintroduces mystery not by being distant, but by being engaged in your own life. You become less predictable, not because you're trying to confuse someone, but because your attention is no longer anchored to their responses. This unpredictability creates a subtle sense of intrigue that can't be forced through effort alone. Another important aspect is emotional self-regulation. When you pull back, you give yourself space to detach your emotions from immediate outcomes. You stop checking your phone as often. You stop reading into every delay. You regain control over your own emotional state. This shift changes the way you communicate when you do engage. Your messages become lighter, more relaxed, and more grounded because they're no longer carrying the weight of expectation. And that emotional tone is often what reignites interest more than any specific words ever could. Pulling back also restores balance. Healthy attraction requires reciprocity. When one person does all the initiating, the dynamic becomes lopsided, and lopsided dynamics rarely sustain desire. By stepping back, you're not demanding effort, you're making space for it. You're allowing the other person to step forward if they choose to, and that choice is what makes their interest meaningful. When someone reaches out because they want to, not because you prompted them, the interaction carries a different energy, one that feels authentic and self-driven. This approach requires patience and trust, which is why it's so difficult for many people. Silence can feel uncomfortable, especially when you're used to maintaining connection through constant communication. But discomfort doesn't mean something is wrong. Often it means a new and healthier dynamic is forming. In that quiet space, the other person has the chance to notice what's missing, to feel the absence of your presence, and to reconnect not out of obligation but out of genuine desire as your life continues to move forward, full and engaged. No longer paused by waiting, no longer defined by whether someone else reaches out first, but grounded in the knowledge that you are choosing connection, not chasing it. What you say when you finally speak again matters far less than the emotional position you're speaking from. Most people think there's a perfect sentence that will magically make someone miss them, but words only work when they are backed by the right energy. If what you say is driven by frustration, disappointment, or the hope that it will force a reaction, it will land with weight instead of impact. The goal is not to call out the behavior or explain how it made you feel in a way that seeks reassurance. The goal is to communicate from a place of calm independence, where your message feels optional, not loaded. The most powerful thing you can say is something that gently releases pressure rather than creating it. This might sound counterintuitive, especially when you've been feeling overlooked. But when someone senses that you are okay regardless of their response, it shifts the entire dynamic. A simple message that acknowledges connection while also showing that your life is full does more than any emotional explanation ever could. It signals that you enjoy them, but you are not waiting on them. That balance is what creates space for missing to happen. Missing someone isn't triggered by guilt or obligation. It's triggered by contrast. When your presence is warm and enjoyable, and then it's not constantly available, the absence becomes noticeable. What you say should reflect that warmth without attachment. Something light, honest, and self-contained communicates confidence. It doesn't ask a question that demands a reply. It doesn't hint at disappointment. It simply exists, complete on its own. And when a message doesn't require anything from the other person, it often invites more curiosity than one that does. There's also power in clarity without confrontation. You don't need to explain patterns or point out who texts first. That often puts people on the defensive. Instead, a grounded statement that reflects your standards without accusation can subtly reset the tone. It shows that you are attentive to how you feel, but you trust yourself enough not to negotiate your worth through text. This kind of communication feels mature and emotionally secure, which naturally draws people closer rather than pushing them away. Timing plays a role as well. Saying less but saying it when you're truly centered creates more impact than speaking immediately from emotion. When you wait until you feel settled, your words carry steadiness. They don't rush. They don't seek control. And that steadiness is felt even through a screen. It communicates that you are not reacting, you are choosing. When someone receives a message like that, it interrupts their assumptions. They may have assumed you would always initiate, always be there, always carry the connection. Suddenly, they feel the shift. Not because you announced it, but because your energy changed. The message becomes a reminder of your presence without the guarantee of constant access, and in that space, curiosity begins to form, interest starts to lean forward, and the emotional absence becomes noticeable because it's no longer being filled by effort, explanation, or emotional labor that once made connection effortless for them but costly for you. Confidence is often misunderstood as being loud, bold, or emotionally detached. But in reality, it's much quieter than that. True confidence shows up in how you respond when things feel uncertain. When someone doesn't text first and you don't immediately rush to fix it, explain it, or soothe your own discomfort through action, you are practicing self-respect. You are telling yourself that your value doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's behavior. And that internal shift changes everything about how you show up, even when you say very little. Self-respect creates a natural boundary without needing to announce one. When you stop overextending, you communicate that connection with you requires mutual effort. This isn't a rule you state out loud, it's a standard you live by. People tend to rise or fall to the level of access they're given. When your time, attention, and emotional energy are no longer unlimited, they become more noticeable. Not because you withdrew affection, but because you stopped giving it away in places where it wasn't being matched. There's a powerful psychological effect that happens when someone realizes they are no longer the center of your emotional focus. When you're no longer watching your phone, waiting for a reply, or shaping your day around whether they reach out, your energy shifts inward. You become more present in your own life. That presence is attractive because it signals fullness. It shows that being with you is an addition, not a rescue from boredom or loneliness. And when someone senses that, they often feel drawn to reconnect, not out of fear of losing control, but out of genuine interest. Confidence also allows you to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into it. You don't need constant reassurance to feel secure. You trust that if someone values you, they will show it in their own way and in their own time. And if they don't, you trust yourself enough to walk forward without forcing clarity. That level of emotional maturity is rare and it stands out. It makes people stop and reconsider how they engage with you because the dynamic has changed. You are no longer chasing a response, you are responding to life. When self-respect becomes your baseline, you stop trying to be missed and start becoming unforgettable by default. Your absence isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply felt because it used to be filled with your warmth, your curiosity, your presence. And now that presence is no longer guaranteed. It's offered when there is reciprocity. This creates a quiet but powerful pull, not because you engineered it, but because you allowed someone to experience the natural consequence of your confidence, your standards, and your willingness to choose yourself without resentment, without explanation, and without sacrificing your emotional well-being to keep a connection alive that was never meant to survive on effort alone. When you step back and look at the entire picture, it becomes clear that this was never really about texting at all. It was about energy, balance, and the way you relate to yourself when someone else becomes inconsistent. The moment you stop treating silence as a verdict on your worth, everything begins to shift. You stop reacting from fear and start responding from self-respect. You stop trying to secure attention and start allowing connection to happen naturally. What truly makes someone miss you is not a clever line or a perfectly timed message. It's the feeling they get when your presence is no longer automatic. It's the realization that you brought warmth, ease, and emotional safety into the connection, and that those things now exist in your life, whether they show up or not. When you remove pressure, release expectations, and trust your own value, you create space for genuine desire to emerge. At the end of the day, the strongest position you can ever be in is knowing that you don't need to chase to be chosen. You don't need to over-explain to be understood. You don't need to prove your worth through effort. When someone texts you because they want to, not because you prompted them, the connection feels different. And when they don't, you still remain grounded, whole, and open to something that meets you with the same level of intention and care you bring to the table.